But yeah, there's a lot of gay stuff going on that we can kind of talk about a little bit. First things first, thank God. I'm not even kidding. Thank the Lords in heaven. We can finally confirm this and set everything aside. Gege completely confirmed that we're done with the Gojo stuff. We are not reviving Gojo. Gojo is donezo. He's dead. It's over. We'll take that. Like, thank God. But you know what? It still wasn't enough. They're still talking about Gojo coming back. They're still talking about Gojo coming back. But this has confirmed the funeral portrait of Gojo Satoru. Maybe that's why he drew it so goddamn ugly. Someone gotta check in on Jessie. I think that's why she's absent right now. Gege's discussion about Mei Mei. Why is a character like Mei Mei escaping, but other characters are dying? And he's like, yeah, I don't think anyone would care if Mei Mei died, so I'm gonna leave her alive. If that isn't the most respectable thing I've ever heard in my entire life. All right, here we go. Summary of behind-the-scenes story reveals from the Jujutsu Kaisen exhibit. Gege mentioned he wished he could have used culling game rules during battle to turn the tides. Can you think of a rule that would have helped in the fights? I definitely think that could have been very cool. Like, for example, you have Hikari and Kashimo duking it out for each other, and then all of a sudden, mid-battle, you know, Kashimo casted a rule costing 100 points. No, sorcerers can only use their domain once per fight. And then that locks Hikari into no longer being able to fight with Jackpot. And then it literally is just Kashimo fighting base Hikari, and Hikari can be dead. Like, that would be an instant win con for someone like Kashimo. So I think that's important to note. Is like, that's like a really great idea. Or like specifically like Gojo versus Sukuna. You know, spatial techniques like the Limitless are nerfed, or some kind of nerf, you know what I mean? The only people that are able to see inside the colonies are people with no extra eye abilities, or some shit like that, like something very specific, very Hunter x Hunter-esque. But I understand what Gege means when he says, like, he probably mentioned it a little bit further. Yeah, here. Considers the lack of culling game rules in battle, plus little background on Sumiki, to be failures on his part. Gege, like, talks about how he would have preferred making it like a tournament style arc. He said he thinks he could have done so much of a better job making characters more prominent. He said he really loved making the characters side stories. He really, before their fights and against, which honestly is the highlight of the culling game, right? It's characters like Higuruma, it's characters like Kashimo, characters that Gege wrote specifically for the culling game and introduced to have a very important role. And then, as we know from the data book stream, the way that Gege writes his stories, he's a very character-driven person rather than narrative-driven person. So his characters write the story for him. The amount of times that Gege has literally said, the story has gotten away from me, is absolutely insane. But yeah, following up, initially Yuji was meant to be the supporting character to Megami, which is crazy having the full context of the Jujutsu Kaisen, knowing that things are supposed to be reversed, and Yuji was going to be the dertagonist and Megami was going to be the protagonist. Thank God. Megami's cool, but Megami could not hold the main character role. Absolutely not. He ain't like that. Both Yuji and Megami had completely different surnames, and Choso and Yuji were siblings, along with an idea of Choso killing Yuji and then taking on his role. Damn, Yuji would have got the short end of the stick. In making Jujutsu Kaisen, Gege decided not to include Yuta in the introduction to simplify the story, which I saw the full explanation of that, and Gege felt that Yuta getting brought in was just a whole nother, like, explaining Yuta's whole entire past and explaining how Yuta worked with the rest of the cast and how everything went together. That's just so much to explain, and having Rika and everything like that. He was like, you know what, I'm just gonna have Yuta show up later. Gojo's the mentor of the story, so Gege felt like he had to put Gojo in the story. Removing him would be like removing All Might from My Hero Academia, which is interesting reading the data book to see how many times that Gege draws or claims to get motivation and inspiration from My Hero Academia. Not like direct story inspiration or narrative inspiration, but like he kind of sees My Hero Academia as like one of his major competitors, and like Horikoshi as like an artist and mangaka to look up to. So it makes sense why he would reference that here. And here we go back to the Nanami, you know, being a curse user. He was supposed to be a villain back in the day, killed civilians, good at desk work, but still complain about it. Geto was always intended to be fake, but identity wasn't fully decided until Shibuya. Yuki was also a candidate, which I think is completely crazy to say, that Gege flirted with the idea that Yuki would have been the main villain. Yuki would have been the main villain. Yuki would have been the one that body hopped into Geto, and been the character that caused the Shibuya incident, started working with the disaster curses. That's so insane. Yuji's mom and Kenjaku, I definitely think, is the much better option. I'm happy that he didn't choose to go along with Yuki as the main villain, even though I feel like Yuki being the main villain is definitely a huge potential. Like, Yuki as a character as a whole is definitely one of the better written characters that doesn't get a lot of shine. Obviously, you know, you always hear that she's a wasted character, and Gege even mentions that he wishes he was able to give more characterization, more love to Yuki, which we'll kind of talk about later as we get into how he thinks he should have restructured the Culling Game arcs. It is nice to know that Gege isn't demotivated from manga whatsoever. Like, the way that Gege brings up a lot of his criticisms and the problems that he has with the story is narrowly in a way that, like, oh, he goes, well, I won't do that next time. Well, I've learned from my mistake, and next time I do a story, it won't be that way. Next time I do the story, it won't be that way. You could blame, but yeah. And then, so last part of that would be Gege had already decided to depart Nanami and Nobara in Shibuya before the arc. So Nanami and Nobara were always intended to die before Gege even wrote Shibuya. So I think a lot of these author interviews are very interesting and really good to know, because it shows that Gege isn't while he's good at writing reactionary characters, he himself is not a reactionary person. He doesn't just on the fly when it's time to draw the chapter go, what, I'm gonna kill this character to gain hype. He already knew when he plotted out the series. He goes, yep, most likely Nobara is gonna die here, most likely Nanami's gonna die here. Damn, so why even leave crumbs of hope? I think with the way that Gege writes, I think it's pretty clear, at least from what I've understood of the data book and what I understand about Gege and everything in regards to that, is that in my honest opinion, I feel like Gege left it open on purpose because, again, one, he wasn't even sure what he was going to put the Culling Game into, so it's possible Nobara could have showed up again. I think he left Nobara open-ended because he himself sure wasn't if he wanted to kill her off or not. I think he specifically, which again, you could definitely critique, I would critique it as well. I don't think that's good writing at all, to leave a character's status open-ended, because you're like, I may bring them back, I may not. Let's see if they fit into the story that I'm crafting. Oh, they don't, well, she's done, because then you just went, what, Nobara died chapter 122 officially, and now we're at 263 and we've still got Nobara cope. That would explain Nobara's lack of potential compared to the likes of Yuta, Yuji, Akari, and Megami. Yeah, it also explains her lack of potential and her lack of showing out in Shibuya, considering that Gege always knew that he was going to get rid of her. That definitely could be a very important part of things. Chad, I wonder how the JJK story would be if it did follow Yuji's goal and not go off the story after Shibuya. So, I definitely can see your point there, where if, like, the story was, oh, we have to find all of the Sukuna fingers, like what the story was originally propositioned as, right? Where Yuji was going to be this radar that was going to be able to detect fingers, and we were going to go on different missions and everything like that to find all of the different fingers so Yuji could collect more and more of Sukuna. And then literally right after that, you know, we start gaining traction with fingers. Then we don't hear about fingers at all for multiple chapters. Like the Sukuna fingers have much of a bearing on the beginning of the story until now. And even then, like, Yuji's never going out and searching for a finger. You know, you could argue Origin of Obedience arc is the closest we get to Yuji and friends taking on a mission in order to capture a Sukuna finger. And arguably, it's not even really a Yuji-centric arc. It's more of a Origin of Obedience is more of a Megami-centric arc because it surrounds getting the curse off of Sumiki. So take it as you, and like the Sukuna finger is kind of a, you know, on the you know, back burner of that part of the arc. It's definitely very cool to just see that, like, I don't think it's any secret at this point, after reading the data book and seeing some of these interviews, I love the way that Gege is as a writer. I think as a character driven writer, he's very true to his characters, and that's what I think I really enjoy about a lot of different series. Like, that's why I'm a big Game of Thrones fan. I'm a fan of George R.R. Martin, at least in certain instances, because George R.R. Martin is specifically a character-driven writer. At least in my opinion, he's a character-driven writer to the T. And what I mean by character-driven writer is that the characters take over the story. The amount of times that we read in the data book, and Gege himself even mentions it in regards to Nanami dying here, is that he feels that the way that Mahito, Nanami, and Yuji would have interacted here in this instance would have resulted in Nanami dying. Would have completely resulted in it. There's no way that Gege was able to envision the characters themselves going about the Shibuya incident without that happening. And Gege admits all the time that he lets his story get away from himself constantly because he lets his characters just go about as they would, and then he has to pick the pieces up afterwards when he realizes we're not going according to plan and we've got to refocus. So Gege isn't perfect, we have to admit that, but I love that Gege isn't afraid to let his characters take over the pen. I love that Gege is not afraid to go, you know what, it probably would be cool and people would appreciate this if I let this character live longer, talking about Nanami, Nobara, but the only way I can envision these characters going about this thing, which frankly, going about Nobara, that goes into a lot about what I said, where I think it makes sense that Nobara died. You'll remember that when the anime episode aired, when Nobara died, for the anime onlys community to find out, people were up in arms. People were very upset that we went from episode 1 Nanami death to episode 2 Nobara death, and it was a little rough. I mean, you know what I mean? It's very quick pacing to get rid of two main characters that quick right off the bat. But I think, again, it makes perfect sense for Nobara to die there. Like, Nobara herself made the incorrect decision to go back into the Shibuya incident when everyone around her was telling her, girl, you're not strong enough to be here. You should probably stay outside of the barrier and heal and just stick to it. You got humbled by fucking Haruta Shigemo. You got humbled by Haruta. Just stop. Just stop, right? Now, everyone argued at me and said, oh, Nobara's a loyal friend. She wouldn't leave her friends behind. She's a Jujutsu sorcerer. She has to exercise curses. It's her job. Okay, bet. So you're proving my point that she made a wrong decision because of her character, and she went forward. She made a wrong decision by following Mahito, which I think was a terrible decision. But most people were like, well, she's loyal to her friend. She wanted to make sure Yuji was safe. She wanted to do this, this, and this. Hey, that's great. That makes perfect sense for Nobara to die then, because she put herself in that position, and that's the way that Gege sees things, and that's the way that I see things. And I think that's why I'm very much on the wavelength of a lot of the story decisions, not all of them, but a lot of the story decisions that Gege makes, because it's like I could see where this situation would end up. But that gets into a lot of the situations that we'll talk about as we get into more of this interview. But I love this. People were so pissed about this. Mei Mei didn't die because characters who don't have the appeal to make readers sad when they die don't need to die. What's the point of pointless deaths? What's the point of pointless deaths? The Geto group caught in Jogo vs Sukuna died. Full confirmation that those fucking damn Tiberius is taking nothing but L's this stream. Mina Misuda cooked. Confirmed roasted by Jogo's meteor. Gege wanted to make Culling Game more like a Gojo rescue arc through its tournament setup, which I definitely can see the way that the Culling Game was set up to be this, and then as Gege continued drawing and writing his story, it just fell apart and didn't end up being this. I think seeing the Culling Game as a tournament setup would have been awesome. I frankly don't know how it would have been set up. I guess the best way that you could have put it together would be like Yuki and Kenjaku when they're standing off in Shibuya Incident, you know, because you saw how Gojo and Sukuna made their little pact to fight, right? What if when they made their pact to fight, instead of Gojo versus Sukuna making the pact to fight, it's Yuki versus Kenjaku making the pact to fight. And at the end of Shibuya Incident, Yuki goes, hey, I'll take 10 of my best people. You take 10 of your best reincarnated sorcerers. We duke it out. And the winner gets Prison Realm, and they make some kind of binding vow or something like that, that creates the ability for a tournament arc, which kind of goes into what Gege kind of says, because he considers the lack of Culling Game's rules in battle plus little background on Sumiki to be failures on his part. He was glad to have at least allowed Yuji and Sumiki to meet, quote unquote. But yeah, like, he also mentions that he feels like characters like Angel and Yuki don't get the shine that they should have in the Culling Game, and he feels like if it was more of a tournament arc style, he would have been able to do that. Because again, what we kind of talked about earlier is like, oh, the way that Gege did the Culling Game, where he started off, we're introducing these characters with these in-depth backstories like Higuruma, Kashimo, everything like that. With a tournament style, we could have gotten the same fights that we got now: Yuji versus Higuruma, Yuji, you know, Megami versus Reggie, Yuta versus Ishigori or whatever. But instead of this, we could have gotten a subsection of each fight. Each segment would have had their own run of chapters. And then we would have gotten the backstory for all of these characters, the way these characters interact. It would have been like kind of like Record of Ragnarok almost, if you've ever read Record of Ragnarok, where like we get the characters' backstories slowly funneled to us through the fight, and how these two characters kind of intertwine and everything, which we still kind of got in the Culling Game. I won't say we didn't, but Gege feels like he could have given a little bit of more of characters more shine if he put it more of a tournament-esque, you know, style. Having it be a massive battle royale works better in my opinion, but I'm not going to complain about more Yuki. True. I think it would have been an interesting way to look at things, right? I'm not saying that I don't enjoy the Culling Game that we got. I think I love the Culling Game. I really enjoy the battle royale style, but I can't say that I wouldn't have been interested to see what Gege would have done with the tournament style. I think one thing that Gege always wants to do is not go about the norm, be inspired by the norm, but break the mold and be different than the norm, right? Gege doesn't want it to, you know, move around training arcs, so that's why he constantly makes Yuji suffer, so Yuji has enough suffering to justify the level of power that he ends up getting. Gege was planning on drawing a death portrait of Gojo for volume 26 cover, but came up empty-handed. Damn. Even Gege thinks the art of Jujutsu Kaisen might be good, but there are times when it doesn't match the reader's expectations and vice versa. Don't listen to them, Gege. Your art is great. Fuck all of the people that say it's not. I think Jujutsu Kaisen's got very great art for being a weekly shonen. You know what I mean? I think compared to Boruto, and I say that as someone that likes Boruto and is a fan of Boruto, for a monthly manga, that shit's ass. I would say the same for like Dragon Ball Super. Dragon Ball Super also doesn't have that great of art for being a monthly ass fucking manga. He can draw better on the jump cover without forcing himself, and sometimes his assistants also do the coloring. Cool, that's what happens when we get the good coloring. the character correct coloring, because we know Gege's colorblind ass fucking sucks.